Hello and welcome to WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. I'm Joe Setyen. I'm a deputy managing editor at the Western Journal, and I'm joined by Michael Austin and Deborah Van Kempen. Deborah, you're going to start us off today, and you're going to talk about President Trump and the possibility of a third party. Yeah. Can you get into that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So earlier this week, actually on Monday, there was a new third party that filed their documentation with the Federal Election Commission, and they call themselves the MAGA Patriot Party. And it's funny because Trump's team, right after this happened, of course, a bunch of different reporters reached out to them and were like, do you guys endorse this? Do you support this? And a spokesman for Trump said, quote, "We are not supportive of this effort, have nothing to do with it, and only know about it through public reporting," which is interesting because Trump did consider reportedly forming his own third party after losing the election. But now it seems like he has no intention of doing so, no intention of endorsing this new third party. So the first question that I want to put out to you two, and I'll start with Joe if I can, is do you think that this new Patriot Party is going to gain any traction if they don't have Trump's endorsement?
No, and I'm not sure that the Patriot Party would gain much traction either way. Third parties are in a really tough position in American politics, really just in all politics, because there's the problem of dividing the vote. So back in 1912, when Theodore Roosevelt, he had his kind of successor who was Taft, William Howard Taft, and he ended up not liking Taft. So Taft became president, and he had his term from 1908 to 1912, and then Roosevelt decided, I don't really like Taft, so he started his own party, and they all ran against, those two men and Woodrow Wilson in 1912, and basically what Roosevelt and Taft did was they split the vote, and Wilson ended up winning. And that's kind of been the warning for splitting parties in the past 100+ years, because we know that's what's going to happen. And Republican voters, conservative voters, are smart enough to realize that that's what's going to happen. I don't think that's why. I think that's why it would not gain any traction.
Fair enough.
Yeah, Trump's power comes from his ability to work within the Republican Party and kind of mobilize their base. It's just both parties would be weakened, and he wouldn't have an advantage anymore. But even more so, I forgot where I was going. Never mind.
No worries.
But it's not going to be a winning strategy for him.
No, and he knows that. I mean, we saw in kind of the days of kind of amid the inauguration, we saw some reports that said Trump's thinking about forming his own third party, and the media kind of breathlessly reported it like, what if this happens? This could be huge. And look, we all know this is one of those things that, Trump, for all his many, many strengths, sometimes he'll just think of something and he'll talk to his advisors about it, and they're pretty leaky, and it'll get out to the press. And it's not something that was seriously going to happen. I don't think it's something he seriously was entertaining, because it's also not going to best utilize his strengths.
Right.
But the media wanted us to think it was this huge thing. The Republican Party is fracturing, and kind of the party has seen its last days. It's kind of dying, and that's not happening.
All right, I remember the second point I was going to make.
Okay,
so
go for it. We're ready.
I think Trump is going to understand that he can have a lot of power still as a kingmaker, as a guy that gives people endorsements, and he's going to have a lot of sway doing that. I think Andrew Bryan and I were on last week, and we were talking about this, or maybe 2 weeks ago, and if whoever he gives an endorsement to for 2024, that person's going to have a huge advantage. And I think Trump is going to realize that he has that power, and he's going to use it to keep himself kind of in the game.
And it's not going to be kind of like what you've seen with Obama and kind of the presidents before that, where they waited out during the primary, and then they won't get involved until after the primary is over, which means their endorsement's kind of meaningless. And nobody cared really that Obama endorsed Joe Biden. Everyone knew he was just going to endorse the nominee. Trump's not going to do that, because Trump doesn't care. He's going to actually endorse the person who he thinks is the best, the best person to lead the Republican Party and to lead the country. So that is going to be huge. That is so much more power than we're used to seeing.
And he has a history of loving to flex his muscles. So he's going to do that.
Yeah. I think it's a great point too that you made, Joe, that the media, as soon as this happened, was all over it. Like the Republican Party is fracturing, and this is a civil war and stuff like that. So, and I know that over the past few months, really, there's kind of been a collective of Republicans that have been considering leaving the Republican Party just because of events that have been happening over the last few months. Do we think that that is something that is a serious issue for the Republican Party?
Well, yeah, I think it's an issue for both parties because I think both parties aren't really focusing on what the people, I mean, most people in America, right, are independent. I think, don't quote me on this, the numbers are about 30% Republican or 30% conservative, 30% Democratic, and then 40% liberal. So neither party's really doing enough. I mean, yeah, 40% independent.
Yeah.
So neither party's really doing enough to get those independent voters, that huge, massive chunk. So why are they leaving the Republican Party? Why are they leaving the Democratic Party? Because they just don't feel represented by either one. I don't like the idea of one party splitting. I do like the idea of third parties. I'm a libertarian. I wish that the Libertarian Party would do a lot better. I think that if people feel like their beliefs are not being represented by either the Republicans or the Democrats, then they should certainly vote for whichever candidate is their conscience tells them to vote for. I just think that breaking one party in two is just not going to practically accomplish very much.
Yeah, it's not very productive.
Yeah, and Trump, going kind of off of that, how both parties aren't necessarily reaching out to the voters on the issues they care about most. Trump did a really good job as a populist of really reaching out to the people, of really mobilizing those that voter base. And hopefully going forward, the Republican Party can capture some of that. But we'll have to see. I'm pretty pessimistic.
Yeah, I think kind of the problem we're seeing with the Republican Party is there's a lot of wannabe Trumps, right? And they're not actually Trump. They're just people who have his bluster or have his, they try to, carry a big stick like Trump would. Or what's that Roosevelt phrase, speak softly and carry a big stick. Well, Trump spoke not softly.
Spoke loudly and
carried a big stick. So people are just trying to copy that from him. And it comes off a little bit, I think, as insincere. Maybe it's just me because they're not him and they're just trying to tap into that populist support that he was able to tap into.
Yeah. So I know that we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, and you said that you didn't really think that it was likely that Trump would form his own third party. But do we think that Trump is going to be satisfied moving forward with passing on the torch to someone else with just endorsing another candidate?
Man, I mean, it's hard to say. He's a very unpredictable person.
Yeah.
I think, given what we know about him, there's a good chance he's going to want to run again. But yeah, we'll just have to see. It's way too early to know what he's thinking about.
Yeah.
I think no. I don't think he's going to be just pleased to pass the torch on to somebody.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing: Trump wants to be in the spotlight. I mean, he wants the attention, good or bad. He wants it. He wants to be in the headlines.
Yeah.
So I don't think he's going to run again, even though he'll be tempted to, because I think he knows he probably can't win. But what he is going to do is, I think, not maybe a social media network. He's going to do something with the media where he will always be kind of the spot.
Yeah, well, he was first and foremost a celebrity, a billionaire. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. He loves the attention. There's nothing particularly wrong with that. He wants the spotlight to be on him, and he's going to find a way to make sure we're talking about him 4 years from now.
Yeah.
Or 3.5 years from now.
I know that you wanted to talk about an issue that we're suddenly seeing happen with raising the minimum wage.
I am.
Yeah.
I do want to talk about it rather. But yeah, so I'm going to quote a little bit from Reason Magazine. But basically, recently, on Tuesday, House Democrats prepared some legislation that would raise the minimum wage from $7.25 per hour to $15 an hour, and that's more than doubling it. So I'm going to quote here from Reason Magazine again. As of September 2020, 100,000 businesses that initially shuttered temporarily were declared dead, a number that has surely expanded through the COVID-19 winter surge. Many other establishments are on their deathbeds. The life support, named Raise the Wage Act of 2021, could very well do them in, akin to replacing a diabetic's insulin with a sugary drink and hoping for the best. So here's the thing. Here's what really sticks out to me. Hundreds of thousands of businesses have dealt with COVID, right? They've dealt with governments, largely Democratic, forcing these lockdowns down their throat. Now, what the federal government is saying is, we're going to make you double your wages for some laborers, not all of them. and enjoy, try not to go out of business, but we're not going to really help you, but have fun paying people more money. And look, we know what happens when you're forced to raise the minimum wage.
Yes.
It means higher prices, for one thing, for customers, which, let's say you disregard higher prices. Let's say hamburgers go up by 20%. I don't like it. Maybe we can deal with it. But here's the thing. It also means that the low-skilled workers who are making the minimum wage are going to either have their hours cut or they're just going to get laid off. So, of course, some workers are going to get paid more, but also some workers are just not going to work there anymore. And here's the thing. The minimum wage affects small businesses and big businesses alike. When small businesses can't deal with raising the minimum wage and paying people way more than they're worth, they go out of business. When big businesses do it, they go automate. They automate what we see with McDonald's with those automatic kiosks, and what we're going to be seeing at more restaurants and more businesses as the years go on. Big businesses can handle it. Small businesses can't. So what we're going to see is just the increased corporatization of America, where small businesses are the lifeblood of the economy, and we're just going to see them kind of die out slowly if this becomes law, which I hope it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, in the year of COVID, that's kind of been the common theme of Democrat policies, is that they've hampered down on small businesses and they've benefited big business and people higher up on the economic scale.
And we're not. I mean, as conservatives or libertarians, as small government people, we're not anti-big business.
No,
right.
But we realize that it's best when it's a mixture of big businesses add a lot to the economy and small businesses add a lot to the economy. We have to have both. The government shouldn't make policies that it knows are going to drive small businesses out of business just because it can. It's very scary.
And it's such a simple idea that so many people don't understand that when you raise the price of a worker that a company has to pay for, there's going to be less companies that are willing to pay that price. Labor is an asset just like anything else. And if that asset becomes more expensive, it behooves a lot of companies to try to find other solutions, which leads people out of work. It's such simple logic.
It is.
And yet I would say the majority of people don't get that.
Here's a question for you guys. Have either of you worked fast food or restaurant jobs before?
I will say I was a hostess at a Red Lobster.
Okay, hostess at a Red Lobster.
I was pretty lucky I didn't.
Okay, you were pretty lucky you didn't. But I assume if you've worked one of these jobs, I worked at a Wendy's once.
Nice.
Look, the commodity is hours. You always want more hours, or at least people who want to work want more hours. And the managers can only give you so many hours because there's only so much they can pay you.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what you're doing is basically saying, look, we know how tight it is, even at a Red Lobster, a big corporate chain. We know how tight it is. We know how difficult it is for you to get your hours. But now we're going to double your wage or, add 30% to your wage or whatever. It just doesn't make economic sense. What do you think is going to happen?
To tell you where I did work, I was a supervisor for drivers at UPS.
Okay.
And when the union voted for wage increases for drivers, that ended up making less hours for drivers. The company started hiring weekend drivers that were taking even more hours, and people weren't able to work on the weekends anymore. And it just, in the end, there was a lot of people making less than if, or at least close to the exact same amount than if they hadn't forced the company to raise wages.
And look, this isn't rocket science.
No.
Right.
At the Western Journal, we ran a story about this. Earlier this week, there was an Ohio restaurant owner. His name is Adrian Adornetto. I may be mispronouncing that. Apologies. He went on Fox News and he said, look, if the minimum wage goes up to $15 an hour, he's just going to have to cut wages for his employers. He said, we're looking at the ripple effect, and it's just large. He said, it'll do several things to my business and my employees. I'll be most likely cutting hours back. I'm in the pizza business, so that $12 pizza might grow to $19 pizza. And in my part of Ohio, that's very expensive in today's standards. The restaurant business and so many other businesses have such small margins of profit. And throwing something else into the mix just isn't going to help.
It's not
it's
good
common
for
sense. It's economics. And they don't seem to get it.
Yeah.
So here's my question for both of you. I'll ask Deborah first and then Michael.
Sure.
Is this realistic? Do you think Democrats are going to get a $15 minimum wage across?
Is it realistic? No. I do think that they're going to try to push it, though. And I think the reason for that is that there has been... People on the left really are not fans of capitalism or the free market. They have become increasingly... Sorry. But they have just become so much increasingly they've become so much supportive of socialist policies, and that's become a lot more vocal over the past year. And so I think that this is definitely something that they're going to strongly consider. And I don't know if they're going to be able to pass it, but I do think that it's something that is definitely going to get seriously considered.
Yeah. What do you think, Michael?
I mean, I'd like to know your opinion. I think there's a pretty good chance.
Yeah.
I think they very well might have the votes. I mean, in terms of like really radical socialist stuff, I think we have a better chance of prohibiting those things from happening because there's a few Dem senators that aren't willing to go along with that.
Yeah.
But because of what we talked about earlier, even though it's such a simple idea, people really don't understand the issues with raising the minimum wage. And I think it's not going to be seen as a very radical position to take.
Well, look, unfortunately, there's 2 points I want to make to that. Unfortunately, I think raising the minimum wage is pretty popular in American society. And it's because I think we just need education. We just need to understand, look, this is what happens when you raise it.
Yes.
Yeah.
People aren't being told. They're really being lied to by politicians who say, look, we'll raise the minimum wage. And they don't say, look, and this is what's going to happen afterward.
On the surface, it sounds
Right.
like a great idea, just like it sounds like a great idea to pay off college debt.
Exactly.
And then there's all these little things behind it that people don't understand.
Exactly. And I think what it's going to come down to, I think, is probably the filibuster. So as we know, Democrats control the Senate right now. But such big legislation like this is almost certainly going to need 60 votes in the Senate to pass, unless Democrats pull the nuclear option, which means they would kill the filibuster. So they just need 50 votes to pass any legislation. I don't know that they're going to do that because even if they want to, I don't know that they can because there's still some moderate Democrats
Yeah, they don't have the votes
on the side. That being said, I do wonder, are any Republicans going to vote for this, raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour? Probably a few.
I would think so,
honestly.
yeah.
Probably a few of the more, kind of liberally ones are going to do that. So,
Yeah.
Deborah, you touched on my next question, but I'll ask you to go into it a little bit more. What does this kind of show us about the left's true intentions for business?
Well, I think that it shows us, like I said, they hate the idea of capitalism, and they hate the idea that you can choose who you want to work for, and the company you work for can choose how much they want to pay you.
Right.
And I think that that's what's being called into question here is how much influence are we willing to let the government have in terms of providing people jobs. And I think that COVID has only helped them with this. I think that all of these small business closures that have happened over the last few months have just shown how much influence the government can have over if people get to work.
I think you're absolutely right. What about you, Michael?
Yeah, it's kind of going off on a little of what you said there, Deborah. Democrats don't believe that business owners should have as many rights.
Yeah.
They believe in taking rights away from the business owners. They believe in, when a business owner hires someone, they're entering, a consensual exchange of goods and services and a contract. And that business owner should not be forced to give anything that he or she is unable or unwilling to give. And Democrats do not believe that. They believe in the worker above all else. Including the business owner, and that just it hurts the economy and it leads to all kinds of ridiculousness like this.
Agreed. And speaking of things that the Democrats believe in and that they're pushing, that leads us to our next topic, which is about equity. Michael's going to take us through that.
Yeah. So equity. So throughout,
not home equity.
No, not home equity. So throughout the campaign, Biden and Harris made it pretty clear that they opposed what is traditionally thought of as equality or equality of opportunity. And instead, the type of policies they hope to pursue are those of equity, which means equality of outcome. There's this tweet from the White House that we're going to pull up right now that kind of shows this thinking and how it's affecting policy in terms of their COVID response. And so it says, President Biden will ensure equity throughout the vaccination distribution process by protecting the most at risk, increasing availability in hard-hit communities, eliminating out-of-pocket costs, and establishing the COVID-19 Health Equity Task Force. Now, look, to a layman that's just reading that doesn't understand what equity is, there doesn't really appear to be anything wrong with that. But the Equity Task Force, their primary goal is prioritizing race over whether people are sick. And during an appearance on Bill Maher's show, Camille Foster, this great, really talented, really smart libertarian comment. Yeah, have you run into him at all your libertarian gatherings? Yeah.
Nice.
So he basically explained, these are complicated concepts, and he explained really well why equity is so wrong. And here's a clip of that.
this pivot towards equity, racial equity, and a focus disproportionately on outcomes is something that is rather new, but seems to have taken the country by storm. It's almost the only thing people can talk about.
Equity meaning as opposed to equality.
Equity as opposed to equality.
Which can you?
I can give you a practical example of that.
Yes.
COVID, we were just talking about a moment ago. We know that the most vulnerable population when it comes to COVID are older people. That if I took people over the age of 55,
sure,
that's 80% of the deaths. There have been actual conversations about prioritizing people on the basis of their race, because COVID is said to disproportionately impact black people relative to white people. It is a ridiculous proposition, but it's a proposition that's found its way into the mouths of governors here in California, the pages of the New York Times. We're actively talking about this kind of ridiculous, because we actually know when we look at the global impact of COVID in the United States, again, 80% of the people who are dying are older, around 18% of the people who are dying are black. A life lost to COVID is a life that matters, and we can focus on the people who are vulnerable without making this about race. Making it about race only obscures the actual issue, and is less likely to help.
If you separate race from economic insecurity, sure, right? Like Hispanics are hospitalized at 3-4 times the rate of white people for a variety of reasons.
For a variety of
they're essential workers. Right. They're riding the bus from Boyle Heights to Beverly Hills.
But the important point is that it's not fundamentally about race. You can't un-Hispanic them. There may be different issues in their communities. It could be that they live in homes with more people. It could be that they live in more urban centers. If that's the case, the policy you're tailoring is for people in urban centers, not Latinos. This is a confusion of categories that is actually distracting us from forging good policy. What you get is great sound bites. You don't actually fix problems.
It makes.
So I really thought that his explanation there was brilliant, and I've tried to explain the principles of equity versus equality to a lot of people that aren't very into politics before, and it's difficult because it's complicated stuff. But he just really simply made it clear there, and the logic he used for those COVID policies, that can be applied to economic policies of equity versus equality as well. And even more so when you pursue equity in terms of economic redistribution to help, because, African Americans in America are disproportionately poor.
Sure.
The percentage of their population that's poor is more so than the white population. So Democrats and the Biden administration and other leftists, they believe that we should have economic policies geared towards helping raise them out of poverty. The problem here being that what this does is it creates a system of government dependency that takes away personal responsibility, it takes away agency, and it keeps people from entering the workplace where they can gain market skills, and then that's how you climb the economic ladder. And it's just kind of the same idea as with the minimum wage. If you raise that, less opportunities for people, less chances for them to develop skills and make more money. So, do you think that the Biden administration is going to continue to pursue these policies?
I think so. I think that over the past year, it's this whole idea of racial inequality, which is a real thing in some cases, but I think that this whole idea that Black people are disproportionately affected by COVID, that Black people aren't afforded the same opportunities that white people are. I think that there are a lot of faults in that argument, but I think that those are faults that people are often willing to overlook because it sounds like the right thing to do. On the surface level, it sounds like the socially justice, politically correct thing to do.
Yeah, so I think here's the thing, right? We know, like Camille said, that Black people are more likely to be poor, which is a tragic. We know that Black people and Hispanic people are more likely to be affected by COVID. Now, this is not because of the color of their skin. This is not because they are Black.
Yes.
It's because of many or Hispanic or whatever. It's because of many other circumstances surrounding this. So it strikes me, just like it strikes me for the minimum wage thing, as laziness to just go after we'll say, oh, well, we'll just address it and take care of, we'll just blame it on race, or we'll just blame it on the minimum wage, just raise the minimum wage, because you don't want to get to the root of the problem.
Yeah.
They don't want to get to the root of the problem. Why are more black people dying of COVID? Well, there's a whole bunch of problems under that would probably explain it. It probably has to do with, poverty, stuff like that, access to medical care, things like that. And just addressing it and saying, well, we're only going to address it based on race. It's just laziness. It is just laziness.
And Kamala Harris, she put out a video during the campaign basically explaining why she believed that equity was more important than equality. And basically, it just was like a demonstration of, hey, so if we pursue equality and we give everybody the same chances, not everybody's starting in the same place. So that's not really fair. Some people need a leg up. And that's somewhat true. But when you give them that leg up using like government handouts,
it doesn't
then
help.
It doesn't help. It keeps them in that spot. It keeps them from continuing to climb. And we know before the welfare state came into effect that the black community was on the rise. And then as soon as that happened, as soon as they started handing out checks to families that had no father in the home, all of a sudden that created incentives for there to be no father in the home. And we know that no father in the home leads to crime and all kinds of other problems with personal responsibility and stuff like that. So if you really want to pursue equity, if you really want to pursue policies that will help raise up communities that are hurting, that are doing worse than others, you should be pursuing policies that create more economic freedom, that give people more chances to get into the market, to start learning, to start gaining skills. You should be promoting policies that increase the level of education they're getting. So school choice would be a big one. And lastly, one of the biggest things you can do, I read this book recently called Biblical Justice versus Social Justice. I think it's by Scott David Allen. And, he was a missionary for a long time.
Real G's have 3 names.
Yeah. He was a missionary for a long time. And he used to believe that economic redistribution was the way to help underserved communities. But what he realized as he, continued his path as a missionary was that more so than any sort of handout or giving people free stuff, what really helps people climb the economic ladder and just make better of their lives is sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. That is the best thing you can do. Good values, personal responsibility, and economic freedom. Those are the 3 things you need if you want to raise a community out of poverty.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, it's cliche to say it, but I mean, the gospel is the answer for everything. It's the answer for all the problems. It's why I think far too often the secular left can't actually find answers for any of this stuff, because they're looking for, they're looking for the government, they're looking for whatever, they're looking for any idols that they think will help people overcome their problems. And it's just simple. It's just the gospel. And
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you talked about how the author of that book was a missionary, because I remember, I think it was a month ago or a few months ago, when I grew up in my church, we did that Operation Christmas Child thing with the shoebox where you fill the shoe boxes. And I think we actually did it here at Liftable. And it's interesting because when I was reading this article, it was talking about how a lot of the goods that are sent to those countries end up not being used, or like they're not very helpful. And the author was saying that the reason for that was because they either don't know how to use the toys, like the kids have no idea what the toys are, or they are just so out of the ordinary that it just creates sort of like a disconnect in their mind. And I thought that it was just very interesting, but it kind of makes sense when in the context of what you're talking about, in the context of how giving people handouts is not necessarily the answer for bigger issues, when we could be teaching people real world skills, when we could be giving people opportunities in the sense that they're able to kind of take that step on their own. And it goes into the personal responsibility thing as well. So I just thought that was interesting.
And when we're talking specifically about, the black community, there's a lot of good things that can be done. And we're seeing school choice policies being spread across the U.S. And, these things would help. Just to make it clear, these things would help people of all colors regardless. But we're just saying, I'm just focusing on black because it is disproportionate. And that's a big issue that our country focuses on. And one last point that I wanted to say about that is I'm reading this book by Walter Williams, the recently passed Walter Williams, a great economist. And, he dealt with race issues a lot. And what he said was the number one issue driving a lot of these problems was not economic poverty, but a spiritual poverty in these communities. And so that's what we need to be focusing on.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I think that it's interesting. I feel like we've kind of backslid in the last few years when it comes to racial equality. And, it's so funny because people love to bring up MLK all the time, who obviously was an absolutely phenomenal speaker, a great activist, he was just a great guy all around. And in his speech, the words that he used are, "I have a dream that one day my children will grow up in a nation where they're not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." And I think that where we are now is so far away from there, where we are judging people by the color of their skin.
Yeah. Just a quick point on that, kind of, critical social justice, kind of the leading ideology of groups like Black Lives Matter. It actually does teach that colorblindness is a racist concept, and that judging people just based on their, individual merits is racist because you're not taking into account all the systemic and invisible forces that are keeping them down.
You're not really woke until you're preaching against what MLK said.
Yeah, honestly.
Yeah.
Well, did you have anything else, Michael?
No, I think that's about it.
All right. I think that just about wraps up the time that we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in to WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. We have WJ Live every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, 2 p.m. Pacific Time. To our audio listeners, you can go to youtube.com/WJ Live. You can click the subscribe button if you want to help us out a little bit there, and hit the bell to be notified when... Oh, sorry. Do it again.
Ding.
There you go. You can hit the bell to be notified when we are podcasting. And then to those of you who are joining us on YouTube, thank you so much for tuning in. You can also listen to WJ Live on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And finally, we firmly believe that here at the Western Journal, our mission is to equip readers with the truth. And so one of the biggest ways that you can help us do that is by supporting real journalism and by, if you feel led to, becoming a subscriber at the Western Journal. If you want to do that, you can go to thewesternjournal.com/join. And just again, thank you so much for being with us today, and we will see you guys tomorrow.
The Western Journal has rolled out a brand new subscription model designed specifically for readers like you, who want the unvarnished truth that the establishment media won't tell you. Our multi-tiered plans give you exactly what you want, and help us fight fake news during this, the most important election of our lives. Become a subscriber to the Western Journal today and unlock exclusive features you won't find anywhere else. It's easy. Just follow the prompts in this video to join us in equipping readers with the truth.